Well, hi there, I'm Noah Bradley. This is Handmade House TV, and on today's episode, I thought I would share with you some insights with regard to the restoration of a vintage historic log cabin. So stay tuned. Well, all right, once again, thank you for tuning in here to Handmade House TV. On today's episode, I thought I would share with you this particular log cabin that I restored early on in my career. I have learned a great deal about the design and construction of handmade houses by exploring, taking notes, and most of all, restoring historic vintage structures, whether they're log or timber frame or stone. By observing what was done in the past, what makes them so strikingly attractive, what makes them to have endured for centuries, those are the kind of insights we want to use in the homes that we build today. And also those historic structures will teach us what not to do if there's clearly issues and problems associated that we see, or things that are not visible at all. Clearly they did not endure over the decades of time. So there's a lot to learn from the restoration of a structure. And so today I wanted to share with you the restoration of this particular structure. Now here are a few images of this little log cabin that I saw when I was first exposed to it. And as you can see, it was in very rough shape. The front porch was basically gone. The back addition was basically gone. And the main structure itself was in I wouldn't say perilous, ready to collapse, but nonetheless, the owner of this particular property had brought in, I believe it was 6 previous contractors in to do a review of this structure, whether or not it was worthy of restoration. And I was the first one to come on to say that, wow, this is an incredible log cabin. It really needs to be restored. And what I saw in the structure was that it was still stout, it was still standing firm and in place, and that the basic structure, the basic logs of them were still in fine condition. As well as the stone chimney, which was a little bit precarious, but with a little bit of repair work, it could be restored into a fully operating stone chimney. So when we're presented with the option of presentation of looking at a historic log cabin, what's the first step we need to do in order to restore it? And the first thing we need to do is take as many photographs as possible, take dimensions, and also take notes. Once we begin the process of restoration, all of these images will never again be available, and it's a wise idea to have as many notes to reference back. You would think that you would remember things, but frequently that's not the case. Okay, the second step that we would take in the restoration of a historic structure is that we remove everything we don't want, everything that's bad, everything that's defective. One of the features that we all found attractive about this particular log cabin were these pole rafters. Now, the poles had aged a lot. No particular part of a home experiences more stress over time than the rafters do, because they're right up underneath the roofing and they tend to bake dry. And so these rafters were plenty fine aesthetically, and they might have been fine functionally, but when we were doing this restoration, our goal was to give a little bit of an insulative space for the clients with regard to the roof, but also to ensure that the roof would last for centuries into the future, just like this previous roof had lasted all of this time until now. So we basically used these rafters as aesthetically appealing attachments. Once we had made a built-up roof, then we had more or less used these rafters as aesthetics, as an honoring of the historic tradition of the particular cabin. Now, we had enough rafters to do the front porch and to do the main cabin, but when it came to do the lean-to addition off the back, we needed more pole rafters. So what we did was basically the same thing as the original builders of the cabin did, and we went into the woods nearby and cut down a few small pine trees and peeled the bark off of them, put them back into place. Now, if you see this inside shot of the kitchen area looking up, you can see that we painted the paneling that is seen in between these rafters, and by painting this paneling, it caused a whole lot more of a reflective, bright surface in order to keep this room bright. Now, when it came time to put siding on the outside of the little lean-to off the back here, we chose to use cedar, knowing that it would hold up long term. When it came time to choose roofing for this particular cabin, we wanted something that would be attractive and something that would be relatively inexpensive long term, and we wanted something that would be maintenance free. And the best choice for this particular project was standing seam copper. And of course, copper is an expensive initial roof to put in place. It is a leap that you have to put forward in order to put a roof on your home, in order to bite that bullet to pay that much for a particular roof. But when you're building a small log cabin, the cost is not that much different. It's not that hard to swallow that pill of putting such an expensive roof on. But the trick with copper is that in that long term, it's a very inexpensive roof to put on. Now, this particular roof is now over 30 years old, and it is just as nice as the day we installed it. Of course, it's toned down. It was bright and shiny as a penny for a couple of weeks, and then it looked like a dull penny for probably about 20 years, and then eventually it started forming a green patina over top of it. It's extremely attractive, it's extremely durable, and there was a lot of cabins that I built about this same period where the owners chose to go with a cedar shake roof on it, and all of those roofs have now been replaced. Those owners who went with cedar shake have now paid about double what the original copper roof would have cost them, and that copper roof will last longer than any one that's currently alive on this planet. So in observing this log cabin at this stage, in its roughness as it stands in the woods, what is it that we can observe from it that is right about it, that is really precious, that we want to learn from? The first thing is that we noticed that the log cabin was traditionally built. It was built with hewn logs that were flattened on the inside and outside, and that with spacing in between each of the logs where chinking was applied, and where corner notching was done in each of the corners. And if we notice, the corner notching here in this particular instance were V notches. Probably half of the historic log cabins you see were done out of V notches. One of the wonderful things about creating a V notch is it is strong, it's relatively easy to do, and also it can be entirely created with nothing but an axe or a hatchet. No saw is required in order to build a log cabin out of V notches. The other historic log notch that you'll commonly see is half dovetails, which is my preference, and we'll talk about that in a future episode. Another thing that really stands out about this particular log cabin is it emphasizes the attractiveness of a rectangular shape for a home. We never want to build a square home if we can possibly avoid it. Rectangles are always more attractive than squares. Also, we notice about this log cabin is that it is 1.5 stories tall. That's a very efficient and attractive height to build a log cabin. By only going 1 story, we end up looking like a brick rancher, more or less. And by going 2 stories tall, that's a lot of heavy logs to lift a long way up in the air. But by going 1.5 stories, we end up with a very functional space upstairs and a relatively easy home to build. And of course, you'll notice how attractive the log cabin is thanks to this stone chimney properly centered on the end of the log cabin. When we take a look at the other side of the log cabin, the side without the stone chimney, we find that this side is not nearly as attractive as the other side. And of course, a stone chimney not only brings to our project, to our home, attractiveness, but also functionality. Here we can put our fireplace in place, and probably the most important element one can have in a log cabin is a stone fireplace. Two other elements really stand out about the design and functionality of this log cabin, and that is, on the front of it we see this wonderful porch that goes across it. I find that most of the people that I've built log cabins for spend as much time on the front porch as they do inside of the log cabin. Many stories are told, many memories are made by sitting on the front porch of a log cabin. And the other feature is what's around back there. Notice that there's a lean-to addition off of the back. A lean-to addition contributes so much to the aesthetics of a log cabin. So many of us today are conditioned into believing that our entire log cabin needs to be log. It needs to be made of log. The idea of adding another element to it, another addition off of it, seems foreign to us. But traditionally, by far, the vast majority of historic log cabins I've seen have had some kind of alternative addition off of the main structure. A lot of times it's just framed addition, and frequently this is where the kitchen area occurred. But sometimes it can be a timber frame, sometimes it can be a stone addition. But regardless, I would encourage you to keep in mind the idea of adding a lean-to addition off of the back of your log cabin. It'll save you money. They're less expensive to build. They're easier to run all your wiring and plumbing spaces into. And also you can add a lot of windows out back. As you can see, when we put the addition back up in place, we put a lot of windows. I designed a whole lot of windows that would not only lighten up the kitchen space to give it a bright room, but also that light would cast into the log cabin and help lighten it up, because log cabins tend to be a little bit of a dark space because of all of that natural wood. So let's go back and take a look at this little log cabin as she appears today. Over 30 years since I did the complete restoration on it. And as you can see, she's in perfect condition. Yes, indeed, the siding has aged a bit. It is darkened with time, and that shiny copper roof that was on it when it first was new is now turned green. But overall, the log cabin has stood solid as can be, an extremely useful, functional second home, retreat home for the clients that I built for. They've done absolutely no restoration work to it. No log sealers have been applied to it throughout that entire process. If you build it in the traditional manner and you chink it properly, there's no need for any of that. The logs are beautiful. The logs are poplar and chestnut. So if you want to learn how to build a great log cabin, a beautifully attractive one, I encourage you to look to the past, to undertake a lot of exploration of vintage structures, and to undertake the restoration. There's nothing like getting your hands on and following this process all the way through. If you don't have the opportunity, if you don't want to take years of exploring it, such as I've done, and years of doing the restoration work, I invite you to consider signing up for my academy, where I walk you through step by step in how to build an attractive, vintage, historic log cabin. What we're going to do in my next episode here on Handmade House TV, I'm going to take what I've learned, what I've shared with you today from the restoration of this cute little log cabin, and share with you how I built a log cabin from scratch. Learning what I had from these historic small log cabins, and in order to build a perfect little log cabin for a client of mine. Once again, thank you for tuning in here to Handmade House TV, and I look forward to seeing you then. Bye now.